You're listening to When Love Comes, the podcast, a safe space for single women of faith on a journey of healing, growth, and preparing for the love you deserve. This resource was created with you in mind, so you'll be ready when love comes. Hey, y'all, welcome to another episode of When Love Comes, the podcast. I'm your host, April Nowlin. I'm a divorce recovery and relationship coach, and I'm on this crazy mission to help people to heal from heartbreak, to create a life that they love, and to prepare for the love that we all deserve. So, if it's your first time listening to the podcast, welcome. If you're a regular listener, thank you for hanging in there with me. So, after being divorced for 3 times, I kind of realized a few things. I realized that one, I didn't know anything about healthy relationships. I didn't know anything about healing after heartbreak, and I didn't know how to prepare myself for the right relationship. And so that's what this podcast is all about. It's giving you guys the information, the stories about how do you heal? How do you live this amazing single life? And then how can you have these great relationships? So, my topic today is something that I don't think we talk about enough. You may not have even heard about it. I know for me, it wasn't something that I heard about until a few years ago. And I don't even think it really had a name until recently. But we're going to be talking about post separation abuse. And so it's one of those things that you may have experienced it. You may have heard of someone who was going through it, but didn't really know what it is. So, my guest today is Aisha Muhammad. She is a divorce and post separation abuse transformation coach. So she really works with women and people to reclaim their emotional control and regulate their nervous system as they are going through, separation, as they are going through healing after heartbreak and some of the things that they may face. So I hope you guys enjoy this episode. And if you haven't, go back and check out the other episodes. Welcome to the podcast, Aisha. I'm so happy to have you here today.
Thank you for having me. I'm honored to be here.
Awesome. So I want to start with this question that I ask pretty much everyone.
Mhm.
What was your examples of relationships growing up?
My examples of relationships growing up in the context of like male female relationships was primarily The Cosby Show, um, because that seemed to be the ideal picture of
Mhm.
what we're kind of groomed to aim for when growing up. I did have some friends that were in the construct whereby their parents were married. And I saw a lot of struggle by way of income earning. They were always very busy, or they had a shift type pattern where, one would be doing maybe a night job and come back, and another would get dressed and go out kind of thing. So
Mm.
those are the type of examples.
Okay. And then thinking about like the Cosby Show, right?
Mm,
So I grew up with the Cosby Show and like this kind of picture perfect family, and even cooler that it was like a picture perfect black family, right?
of course,
Um,
yeah.
so then you grow up, you get married. How does your marriage like contrast with what you saw, like this picture perfect relationship?
Um, Interesting question. It was different. I think when two people come together, you find out how maybe different you are.
Yeah.
One might be quite vocal and able to express themselves, the other might be quite reserved or, um, not as able. So I found communication to be a bit of a hurdle. And because I don't really beat around the bush with what it is I have to say, I think at times, as we're known for, as Black women in particular, our mouths can be a little sharp. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that was a hurdle I had to learn to get over and learn different ways to communicate whereby it maybe wasn't as cutting.
Yeah.
That's one of the main things that kind of
Yeah.
cropped up. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think communication in relationships is something that particularly like our generation really didn't learn as much, right? So I know I grew up being that kid that you were kind of seen and not heard. We weren't really encouraged to communicate our feelings or our wants or our needs. And then we weren't taught how to communicate them, right? And so
Mm.
if you are someone, I'm very much kind of the sarcastic, speak my mind because that's the kind of household I grew up in, right? So those are communication skills that we have to learn. So I want to jump into our topic. So, this is something that I don't think is talked about enough. I know when you and I met prior to the podcast, you were telling me that it didn't really even have a name until, maybe a few years ago. And so I want to talk about post separation abuse. And I want to start with what is it? So when we hear that term, what are people talking about when we say post separation abuse?
What we're talking about is this scenario. It's when you leave a partner in the relationship, you go about your way, and then their behavior is one that becomes quite malicious,
Mhm.
tactical, harmful. They'll do things like spread rumors about you, assassinate your character with friends, family, acquaintances. They'll also do things like if you share children, and this is what helps the perpetrator be relevant in your life, is if you share children together, then they will use them as chess pieces. They will use institutions and weaponize their parental rights, such as the family court or maybe even schools, to really exhaust you by way of repetitious filings to the court, whereby you have to attend, can be very expensive if you have legal representation. It's going to dredge up a lot of things when you're trying to get your evidence together. And also, it involves the children as well. They will be drawn into the process, and you have to manage their thoughts, feelings, and emotions. And children tend to be manipulated because as women, we tend to, okay, you can attack me if you want, but when it comes to my children, that's going to really bring something up out of us. And they know that. And therefore, they have behaviors to entrap you into back and forth disagreements. Also, they will delay things if you're getting a divorce, whether
Mhm.
it's signing the papers, whether it's just dragging out the whole court procedure to once again drain money, time, energy.
Yeah.
Um, those are the two crux of things, but it can also go into your workplace, your place of work. They can do things like harass you whilst you're there with calls or bombard you with emails or even stalk you outside. Financial abuse is another thing, whereby they may withhold child maintenance, or in America, child support payments, not because they can't pay, but they refuse to pay. So
Mhm.
therefore, you have the financial burden of having to raise children, how many of them you may have, and hide assets if it's in regards to divorce as well, so that you don't fully see what their assets are, so that they can be decisions made on how things are divided.
Man, those are things that I think we've all heard about, or maybe
Mhm.
some of us have experienced, but I don't think really understood what was happening. And so, one of the things I want to ask is why do you think this happens so much after a separation? Now, we do know that statistics tell us that in a lot of abusive relationships, the abuse tends to heighten or get worse once a partner tries to leave. But why do you think it happens so much? This happens so much after separation.
Because it's a control issue. Many women who are in abusive relationships and decide to leave, they actually have to make a escape plan
Mhm.
in order to actually so-called leave. They don't leave, they escape. And with that being said, it sends a powerful message to the perpetrator that they have essentially lost control or being discarded. And that's something that they feel they should do. So the tables have turned, and therefore they feel they have to reassert control. And that tends to be why things escalate. They'll do things, and the mindset behind it is you have to be punished, and you have to pay, and you have to remain under my control.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It really is about control. And what breaks my heart when I see it happen is the way that it hurts children,
Hmm.
because it's really not, like you said, as women, and let me say this for you guys who are listening, this doesn't just happen to women. So we're talking about it from a women's perspective because that is why we believe, statistically, it happens to the most. But let's be clear, this can happen to a man.
Most
Um,
definitely.
so I had this client that she started the divorce proceedings, and she had two small children. I think they were, elementary age. And her husband like cleaned out their bank account, cleaned out. And so, because they were going through the legal process, it wasn't as easy as, hey, just give me the money back. And so immediately upon their separation, she had to figure out, how do I keep a roof over our heads? How do I, because she's thinking, when I leave, I'm going to have at least the money that's in, our savings, and all these things. And so I've seen it firsthand. You've seen it firsthand. But I want to talk about the impact that it has on the kids, because I don't think that's something that we talk about enough. We'll talk about how it hurts us, but what does that impact look like for the children?
Well, they have a lot to grapple with. Number one, because they didn't ask for any of this. They are collateral damage. They're caught in the crossfire of things. So there's that feeling of being put upon for them. Like, why is this happening? Or is it my fault? Or, you know, what's going on? How do I cope with this? There's stability that they had in living in a home with a construct of mother and father is no more. So it's questions of, when am I going to see dad? Because if you're leaving under abuse, it's not always immediate that contact will, be reinstated
Yeah.
with the ex-partner. So therefore, there'll be questions surrounding that. And there's a lot of grief, there's a lot of loss, because they don't have control over what's happening to them. So they need you to be present, reassuring, and to be as stable as you can, to build stability whilst you're trying to find it for yourself, because you've just escaped. So those are some of the things. And then when they do have contact, and if things are said by the other parent, then that's when the manipulation comes in, and they feel as though they have to take sides, or they may come back home and look at you as though you're the villain because of what they've been told. And it can be a minefield and a lot for them to process. So many children will need therapy when going through this, some type of therapy, as well as possibly even yourself, because you have to support your children regardless of what's going on.
Yeah. Yeah. I think about, so my daughter, when me and her father divorced, she was 6 months old. And so she never really knew us together. It was always mommy's house and daddy's house. And there wasn't at that time, too much conversation, right? She was a baby. But then my last divorce, my daughter was 10. And so there was navigating that post separation, and her feelings. And I think sometimes we forget that our kids have feelings. We forget that they're little humans, right? They're kids, but they're people. And so, I do understand, in working with different clients, how the children can really be affected. And you said something that I think is really key, is getting them help. And a lot of times when we talk about a divorce or a breakup, we talk about getting help for ourselves, but getting your children age appropriate therapy or counseling is huge as well, so that they
Mhm.
can navigate the things that are going on. Because, like you said, they don't understand. right? They just don't understand what's going on. So I want to ask, you've done this work for quite some time. Why do you think this isn't a topic that's talked about as much?
Because most people understand domestic abuse.
Mhm.
There's been a lot of talk about it in the media. It's been around for eons of time. We're acquainted with what that looks like. We've been educated more about the types of domestic abuse. It's not just physical, which used to be the banner for it. It's seen.
Yeah.
Post separation abuse, it very much is unseen. It's silent, if you like, it's very nuanced. And therefore, it's not easy for outside persons to spot. And for the person who's inside, if the person's kicking off at your front door or turning up outside your work, you can involve the police with that because it's very overt. But if someone is taking you to court repeatedly and accusing you of things and talking to people about you in a way that may seem like real concern, and doing the same maybe at the school or, the church or the mosque, you know, maybe you're just overreacting. Maybe you're just, maybe a bit sensitive. Just ignore it, you know? The person who's going through it has to really know what these different types of abuses look like to then be able to put it together and see it in its entirety and see that it is abuse. The withholding of child maintenance when they can pay is a form of financial abuse. When somebody is constantly baiting you, blowing up your phone with text messages, going back and forth with you in inboxes with threats and false narratives, that's a form of emotional and psychological abuse. When the person is manipulating the children and doing acts of sabotage, scheduling that they'll turn up at this time, they'll see the child on this day, and they're not turning up. And when you have all of these things coming at you non-stop, it's abuse.
Yeah.
It's abuse. It's not harassment by itself. Altogether, it's abuse. So where's the language for it?
Yeah.
It's not domestic abuse. You left.
Mhm.
So post-separation abuse is what harnesses together what I've described. And it's a very real thing with very real consequences because especially when it comes to the family court and these other institutions, they have decision-making powers.
Mhm.
And, I've heard stories, I haven't had any clients with this, but I've heard so many women on social media that comment under my posts and stuff of situations where they've had their children removed from them due to lies, false narratives, and such like. That's a mother's nightmare.
Yeah.
But it can be a consequence from post separation abuse.
Yeah.
There's been
Yeah.
women suicidal from having to continuously go through post separation abuse. And it's not something that just goes off for a couple of months
Yeah.
or even a couple of years. For some, it can go on for over a decade
Wow.
until those children are grown.
Yeah. Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
When we talked before the podcast, I had given some thought to that question, but you're absolutely right with because it's not seen, because I don't think we talk about enough. And I also think that there is this normalization that when you go through a divorce or when you go through a breakup, that this is just what you are to expect afterwards, right? I talk about the healthy breakups where breakups, divorces don't always have to be these hateful, traumatic, devastating experiences. Now, the divorce in and of itself is devastating, right? But it
Mhm.
doesn't have to be this long, drawn out, thing. And so I think that's also why we don't talk about post separation abuse, because it's almost like I expect this to happen. It's almost become normal.
I think that that's really sad. And I know that there's been a lot of promotion, especially among celebrities, when it comes to these high conflict divorces. But post separation abuse is not high conflict. It's not two persons that just can't get along. It's when there's one person that knows exactly what they're doing, and their plan is basically to destroy, you know, because you have to pay and you have to be punished for the fact that you left, you're no longer with them. You want to have a life without them, you know. So it's very different, and divorce is painful, and people might act out of character,
Mhm.
but it's not going to be on this level, and it's not going to last for the duration of time that it does, and have, you know, the severe consequences that can come from their actions. I think that we just need to have a real re-examination about how we relate to each other, and just with our own personal growth, how we manage disappointment. Because when, your marriage doesn't work and it comes to a point of divorce or you have to leave, there's a lot of disappointment. You didn't go into it expecting for this to happen. And if you loved the person once upon a time, if you had joint plans or goals, or you felt it was a part of your life mission to have this family structure and to build legacy and to break generational curses and stuff, and it does not materialize, there's a lot of disappointment with that. But disappointment can actually, drive people to insanity if they don't know how to properly manage it. And we're seeing so many signs of insanity, and perpetrators of post separation abuse, their actions are very insane because
Yeah.
nobody wins. They don't win. Energetically, what they're putting out, they could never win. That
Yeah.
energy is not going to be lost. It's going to revisit you in some shape or form. And then caught in the crossfire is your own flesh and blood, your future, your legacy. They are being harmed. How does that help you prosper? And then the person that more or less gave their life to bring them into this world and has to be fit in order to guide, nurture, you're ill affecting that person's ability the best that you can. How is that going to serve your children? How's that going to serve her? No one wins.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, man, you said something very important as to, I don't know that there's a one reason why, right? But people who don't know how to handle disappointment, and instead of leaving the relationship, working on yourself, maybe trying to figure out how you contributed to the demise of the relationship, there's so much time spent on trying to retaliate on that other person. And when I hear stories from women and men about who are experiencing this, I'm thinking to myself, how much time does this perpetrator have? Because it takes a lot of time and effort to stalk and email and call, and they just become consumed with this grief, right? And so I think that that is why it is very important for us when we're going through a divorce, after a divorce, to get the help we need, because if not, it turns into this destructive behavior. So
It does.
I want to talk about now, what does someone do? So you're in this situation, and I want to talk about, how do you, whether it's manage it, get help, what does someone do in this situation?
Well, funnily enough, the first thing is to actually believe it's happening. Because I struggled for a little while to accept that the perpetrator actually had the capacity to do some of the things that they were doing. and to cause the effects that it was having in my life. It was like you just wanted to almost make excuses, like as graphic as it was. Yes, to actually accept that it's happening, that's the first step. And to not try and diagnose and make excuses. And the second thing is that you really have to document. You have to document the interactions, things to do with the children. You have to have a system of documenting incidents and keeping a log of things. It's time consuming, but in matters of court or any potential types of, attempted criminalization, it will keep you in good stead. The next thing that you have to do, you have to have some kind of support. This is not something that you want to weather by yourself. So find other people who have experienced this, because you can just speak to family or friends. If they don't understand the pathology of the person and what they're capable of, they will sometimes suggest things that is just unhelpful, because you really have to accept that you don't have control over this person. This person's out of control. You can only control yourself. And you have to do so using what you have available to you. So if you're involved in the court system, then you have a judge that makes decisions. You have to be either getting representation, legal representation, or represent yourself, and be filing your motions and having your paperwork the way that it needs to be. But that support is just, you have to find a way to find it.
Yeah.
You don't want to weather it alone. You need people that understand and will validate your experiences, rather than try and invalidate them.
Yeah. 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 As you're talking about support, I think that divorce, death, some of these things are the things that people, your family, your friends just don't know how, a lot of times they don't know what to say, they don't know what to do. So if you are someone who is, let's say you have a friend or family member who is going through this post separation abuse, what can a friend or a family member do or say or not do or not say if you have someone like this in your life? How can you support someone going through this season of their life?
Listen. Just listen. Because one thing with friends and family, they all base a lot of things on their own experience. And I've come across women much older than me, but they still haven't healed. And they can feed into the drama. And they can give advice that if you yourself can't or don't know the story or just can't discern, it can make things a lot worse. So you really want someone who's just going to listen. This can make you feel like almost like you have to have an independent scribe or witness, because some of the outlandish things that you'll experience from the perp, it's like you need someone there to have witnessed you go through it, like in real time after things happen, to say, well, yeah, she told me about that did actually happen, or I saw this, or I saw that, because it can just be really wild.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I think that that's key is listening. Sometimes I think when we listen to someone going through something, our inclination is to fix. And there's some things we just can't fix for, there's a lot of things we can't fix for another person. But you said something very, very critical there, is having people around you that have healed. And in many cases, when you go through a divorce, it's that person in your ear that's like, girl, he's nothing. And, all of these different things that they are saying out of the kindness of their heart, but they're saying also from their experience of abuse or from a place of not being healed. And so I think you're right. It's very important to get the help you need from a place of healing, which
Mhm.
also is like professional help, right? So, shameless plug. A lot of times in these situations, you need to have professional help. And it's not just like a therapist. But like you said, when you're experiencing financial distress, financial abuse, you might need a financial advisor or someone that can help you navigate your finances, navigate things with your children. And so that leads me into share a little bit more about the work that you do and then how you got started doing that work.
Okay, well, the work that I do is I help high achieving women to be able to navigate this post separation abuse with some strategy and self leadership. So, what does that mean? Now, we have to accept that from the nature of the perpetrator, and especially if you share children with them, they're going to be there. They're going to be there, okay, doing what they do. So, how do you harness the energy, the focus, clarity, self trust, the confidence to manage that, handle it, whilst focusing what you want to do with your life? Steering your children in the direction that you want them to go in or that they want to go in for their life. How do you be, you know? So that's something that I help women do. And it takes self leadership because you have to make that decision that, boy, this is happening, this is real. And I have to expand my capacity to deal with this as well as continue living my life so I don't end up stuck, because that can be the result if you don't learn how to handle it. You're just going to be stuck in the cycle of madness and chaos. So what I do is coach women to be able to do that. And especially when it comes to the communication, there's ways that you have to deal with somebody like that. You have to have boundaries, okay? You have to have them. And have the courage to enforce those boundaries so that things don't escalate, so that you're not overburdened with emotion and your nervous system going crazy. That's another focus of my work with women. And just to work with them in real time. So, because I have had a lived experience, I've picked up a lot of data in knowing the type of perpetrators and the tactics that they use in their communication, the narratives that they're trying to build with an email that could, seem really, okay. But, it's
Mhm.
building towards something and there's patterns and such like, and just helping women know what to respond to, what not to respond to, and how to respond to it, and how to not spiral when they get that text message or they get that email. You would be so surprised to know how much something so simple can deeply ill affect women that are facing post separation abuse, because it's like a wound that can't heal. It's always being prodded and poked. And the text message doesn't just represent, or the email doesn't just represent this flow of communication to you from your experiences with that person. It's all these other incidents and all these other hurts and pains that's happened. That's what's flooding to the surface. So the regulation of the nervous system is something that helps women keep calm and not spiral when that happens, and be present when they're faced with these things that affects their day-to-day life. So it's coaching, but I also have like an offer for mentoring, just because of the depth of what happens and what
Yeah.
women really need.
Yeah. No, it's awesome that you do that work. I think it's very much needed. And so I want to give just some practical things. So there may be someone who's listening, who is experiencing post separation abuse, and what are some of the practical things that you can do, whether it is to set boundaries or keep yourself safe? What are some things that people can do to start protecting themselves in this situation?
You have to build your level of self trust. You have to learn to trust yourself and trust your intuition. A lot of these things are really quite spiritual as well as practical.
Mhm.
So, self care comes into it from making sure that you're giving yourself space, you're slowing things down when necessary so that you can be present. Because there's elements of fear in how these flows of energy from that person comes to you, you have to learn how to be centered and present. So you can do that with breathing exercises, with some breath work. Have a morning routine when you wake up so that that person's email from last night is not the first thing you wake up thinking about in the morning. Or if it is, you have a routine whereby you'll start with some breath work, or you may do some journaling or some exercise, or all of that as your morning routine before you go into the rest of your day. Having that space is one of the most powerful things that you can do so that you feel a sense of self, because a lot of the things that happen is to erode your sense of self. It's to give you a different story, a different avatar of who you are based upon the treatment that you're getting. But you have to remind yourself time and time again who you are, that this is not your entire story, it's just a part of it.
Yeah, that's good. And then how does someone, like you said, I'm getting the emails at night, I'm getting the text at night. How do you manage those things? Is it something where, because we're tempted, right, to respond to everything and to counter everything, especially if that's the way the relationship was, where it was kind of this tit for tat and going back and forth. So, what do you recommend when someone's in that situation and you're constantly getting bombarded with messages? Should you be responding? What should you be doing?
You have to set boundaries for yourself. You have to ask yourself from how you feel in managing all of that, what you can take on. So if you get an email today, you don't have to answer it until tomorrow or the day after, depending on its level of priority, depending on your own energy level or whatever's playing out at the time between you and the person. You don't have to give your energy immediately to that thing. And that allows you to keep your calm. And when you're approaching it from, being more in control, being more cause over whatever you're going to come across in that email, rather than in a panic state of fear. And then when you look at it, you don't read it properly, or, things happen. So give yourself that space, decide for yourself and the means of communication. The perpetrator might want to take you away from written forms. They might want to sometimes be friendly and want to sit down face to face. But if you know this person, their tactics, their history, their patterns, then you would just keep it to written communication only, whereby there's an audit trail. So it might be a parenting app, it might just be solely by email, or if you're more, likened to text messages, But you must decide and communicate the way that makes you feel more safe and certain when communicating with them.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's so much wisdom. I call it the power of the pause, right? Is that when we are in a situation, whether it is we're verbally communicating, we are written, no matter what that communication style is, when we are in a place and we have that heightened level of anxiety or fear or emotion, is taking a pause, right? and asking yourself, how should I respond to this? If I should respond to this. And one of the things that I share with my clients when you're talking about communication after separating is like stick to the facts, right? Stick to the facts. Usually it's about children, answer the questions about the children, keep your emotion out of it. Because I do believe in many of these situations, part of what's fueling the other person is that I can get a rise out of this. I can get you to get angry at me again. I can get you to get frustrated with me again. And so if you keep playing into that, then that cycle is just going to happen. But if you get to this place where it's like, here's the facts and that's it, then like you said, that person no longer has control over you and can manipulate you in that way.
Most definitely. And you just described my experience in the beginning. My God. It was just back and forth, bam, 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 bam. And, then the ex might bring up things from in the past, and it was a minefield and escalation. And I learned along my journey that you don't need to do all of that. Just, as you said, stick to the facts. Don't go into long explanations. They love to get you in a situation where you have to explain yourself. Don't explain yourself. Just give the facts and just make it as short as possible. And you'll find that there'll be less escalation, not necessarily lesser of a flow, but you won't spend, and many women spend hours on trying to compose the right response. And once again, it's an energy suck and it's time wasted. And time is such a precious commodity. So yeah, most definitely keep it brief, keep it straight to the point, and don't over explain.
Yeah. Yeah. That's one of my keys when I talk about boundaries
Hmm.
is you don't owe anyone a lengthy explanation for your boundary.
Mm.
This is my boundary. This is the consequence for stepping over the line of that boundary, and that's it. I don't tell you why I feel that way, how long I felt that way, because at the end of the day, if we keep trying to explain ourselves, it's just falling on deaf ears, right? That person isn't really listening. All they're thinking about is, oh, I got them to get angry again, or I got them to, say something that they shouldn't have said, or things like that. So I want to, as we're closing, I want to talk about safety, right? So once again, we attribute safety when we talk about, domestic abuse, physical abuse, right? It's keeping yourself safe. But when we're talking about post-separation abuse, how can someone keep themselves and their children safe?
Okay, if we do with how to keep yourself safe, it would obviously to be vigilant. If you maybe had, violence in physical violence in your relationship before you left, then that's going to be a consideration for you. It's going to be a chief one to make sure that you are being very vigilant when you're out. You may have somebody that when you go out, you will let them know when you're going. You'll confirm once you come back home that there's security in your house, that you have some type of security system. And you also would have to look at other types of security, such as your online security. Okay, because perpetrators have been known to hack into banking apps to be able to see your whereabouts. Okay, because often when you go places, you spend on your card, it may have your location. So make sure that you've got the proper double authentication. If there were any joint type of accounts that you had, make sure your Google and everything is secure. Make sure you're not following them on social media and that your accounts are secure. Also have some kind of discernment to know when they could actually be watching you and commenting in your comments with fake accounts, because they will do things like that. Make sure you are recording all the incidents, like I said, that happen between you and them, and also that you're giving the proper updates that you should give, because parental alienation is something that is used a lot in the court system. So you want to make sure that all of the information, such as their education, their medical status, and any other things that the other parent, due to parental rights, should know about their child, that you're actually giving that information. What else? If we talk about the children and their security, if we're talking about their mind and their spirit, then they must be validated. They will observe certain things, and it's not to add your own verbal stuff on whatever they may observe when they spend time with the other parent, but listen and just give, encouraging words to them, because they're trying to figure stuff out. And if it's a thing whereby adult information is being shared, or they're not saying nice things about you, and that causes an upset, you can teach them to question respectfully. You can teach them things like how to maybe divert the conversation, or to just articulate how it makes them feel when they do that, and politely request that that they focus on the time that they're there to spend, with, the child and the other parent, together as the main focus. And also, if you do have child contact arrangements and your children go to certain institutions, play groups, sometimes depending on what's happening between you and your ex, you may have to actually brief them so that they are aware of certain things. For instance, if you have issues whereby you feel they may turn up and take the children, and there are certain orders that have been put in place, if you want that institution to be able to act in a way that is going to safeguard the children, then they need to be aware of things. We tend to grow up in households that say, what happens in here, it stays in here.
Mm-hmm.
But you as the parent will need to break that in order to safeguard your children.
Yeah, that's a good one, right? That's a good one. And I think that is what, in many cases, becomes very harmful for our children, is because they don't have an outlet. They don't feel like it's safe to talk about what's going on. So those are all great things. So Aisha, I want to say thank you again, for just your time, your knowledge, your life experience. Thank you again for sharing with us today. I really appreciate you being here.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
So, as we close, if there's someone who's listening and they're like, man, that's what I'm going through, that's what I've been going through and just didn't have a name for it, what would you say to encourage that person?
I would say, you know what you're experiencing. And from what you've heard today, I'm sure it's confirmation of what you're experiencing. So accept the fact that it's happening, and know that there is help at hand, and employ the different solutions that's come out of today's podcast, so that you can be positioned to deal with the things that are to come. But know
Yeah.
that you can get through it, and that you're not alone.
Yeah. I think that's good. Just the reminder, because when we're in this dark place and things are happening to us, just a reminder like that you can get through it is just
Mm,
huge. So thank you again.
you're
All
welcome.
right, y'all. Well, thank you again for listening to this episode of When Love Comes. Like I said at the beginning, my goal is really to share information, to talk about things that we may not talk about as much. And hopefully, you guys learned something today. Hopefully, you guys have some next steps if you're going through this. And so, if you haven't listened to any other episodes, get back out there, listen to the episodes. I think there's like 10 or 11 before this one. So, check those out so that you're ready and also so that I'm ready when love comes.